The Zorathi Empire stretched like a great shadow across half the Orion Arm, swallowing system after system with fire and order, led by Queen Virelia, a ruler both feared and praised for her flawless conquests. Her voice alone could silence a battlefield, and her empire's reach seemed endless. To her people, she was the peak of evolution, the final answer to chaos. But among the border colonies, strange stories still traveled quietly between traders, mercenaries, and frightened explorers. Stories of ghost ships appearing near ancient systems, of entire Zorathi patrols going silent without a sound of struggle, of derelict outposts where time seemed frozen and messages had been carved into metal walls in forgotten languages. Most spoke of these as old myths, echoes from an era when humanity still walked the stars, long before the Zorathi had risen. Official records labeled humans as extinct for over 300 years, their final war tearing apart their homeworld and scattering their kind until nothing was left. Historians called them a cautionary tale. Scientists found no remains. And Queen Virelia herself had dismissed them as nonsense, a legend to frighten children and excuse the failures of weak commanders. Yet whispers persisted, stubborn and strange, always pointing toward one region of space, the dead system once called Sol. When a scouting force of 30 ships went missing near that system, there was no alarm at first. Delays were common in deep space. But then came the wreckage one vessel, found drifting beyond the edge of the Oort cloud. Its hull was undamaged, but its systems were cold. No power, no crew. Every screen on the bridge displayed only a single word, pulsing red against the black: leave. The transmission logs were blank. The airlocks had never opened. The food supplies were untouched, and the internal chronometers showed that the ship had been missing for only 2 hours, though it had been gone for 7 days. Engineers were baffled. Psychologists raised alarms. But Queen Virelia, more curious than afraid, ordered her elite warship, the Imperatrix Vale, to travel to Sol and uncover the truth. The journey was silent. No pirate dared approach the royal fleet, and no star lanes crossed the dark stretch of space around the ancient human system. As the ships neared Sol, strange interference disrupted their sensors. Static filled communication channels. Automated. Systems glitched for brief moments, then returned to normal. It was like the system was watching, reacting. The Queen remained calm, sitting upon her obsidian throne aboard the command deck, her eyes fixed on the distant yellow star. She demanded a full scan of Earth, expecting to find dust, ice, or radiation. Instead, they found something impossible: cities still standing, oceans still flowing, power grids intact. Yet there were no life signs, no movement, just silence. The Queen's officers grew tense, but she remained unmoved. "We are Zorathi," she said. "We do not fear ghosts." She ordered drones to descend. One by one, they entered the atmosphere, and one by one they vanished. No explosion, no impact, simply gone. The command screens blinked, reset, and pretended they were never there. Data files from the drones reappeared scrambled, some showing images of vast cities glowing at night, others filled with static or strange symbols no one could read. A single image came through clearly: a figure standing on a ruined balcony, staring at the sky with a glowing red star behind him. No one recognized the figure, but the Queen leaned forward as if she had seen a shadow from a dream. Then came the voice, not over the speakers, but inside the minds of every crew member. Calm, measured, human. It said only, "You were warned." The systems shut down for exactly 60 seconds. Lights dimmed. Weapons went offline. Gravity flickered. When power returned, the flagship was alone. Every escort ship was missing. A scan revealed that they had not been destroyed or drifted. They were simply no longer there. In their place were old Terran satellites, each humming with energy, each facing the Zorathi flagship like unblinking eyes. Queen Virelia rose slowly and gave the order to retreat. The system had not fired a single shot, no enemy had appeared. And yet her finest warship had just been humbled as the Imperatrix Veil turned away from Sol. Its engines hesitated for a heartbeat before coming to life. The stars behind them flickered, and every crew member aboard the ship, even the Queen herself, felt something pass through them like a silent judgment. Back in her chambers, Virelia reviewed the data endlessly. She played the voice again and again, trying to understand how it had entered their minds. No trace remained. She stared at the red word that had filled their screens leave and for. The first time in her rule, she wondered if the legends were not only true, but still alive. Queen Virelia had never been ignored before. Across hundreds of systems, her commands were treated as law. Her voice carried through the stars like thunder, and even the most defiant warlords bent the knee when her fleet arrived. But the silence from Earth, from this forgotten system called. Sol gnawed at her pride more than fear ever could. She called the warning on the recovered ship a cheap scare tactic, a desperate attempt to seem powerful through mystery and illusion. In response, she summoned her grand fleet, the largest force in the history of the Zorathi Empire. Thousands of ships, weapon platforms, carriers, and data spheres aligned in perfect formation, casting shadows over entire planets as they made their way to Sol. When they arrived, the Queen took the center vessel, a living command ship the size of a moon, and broadcast her presence in over 300 languages known across the galaxy. Her voice was sharp and cold, demanding a reply from any surviving humans. She gave them a choice: show themselves, or be erased from memory. But the silence continued. No answer, no resistance, not even static. It was as if the system was listening, but didn't care. Frustrated but determined, the Queen sent drones again, this time newer, faster, cloaked, and loaded with countermeasures. They descended upon Earth with precision, spreading across the continents, scanning for life, power, signatures, or movement. Yet, like before, they vanished. No sound, no flashes. Their signals simply stopped, one after another, until nothing remained but silence and sky. The Queen reviewed every moment of their descent, looking for faults, sabotage, or interference. But the records ended mid-transmission. No sign of attack, only sudden stillness. Her advisors whispered warnings. Her generals grew uneasy. But the Queen was no stranger to uncertainty. She ordered her personal carrier to prepare for descent. Against every protocol, she chose to go down herself. She would not be mocked by phantoms or hide behind machines. She wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. The vessel broke through the atmosphere smoothly, as if the planet allowed it. Below, Earth looked quiet, untouched by time, its forests green, oceans blue, and ancient cities standing like monuments to a forgotten age. She chose to land near what once was Europe, on a wide grassy meadow surrounded by old hills and crumbling towers swallowed by vines. The wind blew soft and cool. The birds sang briefly, then stopped. Her guards spread out, forming a tight perimeter, scanning every direction, weapons ready but uncertain who or what they were waiting for. Then the moment came, subtle and chilling. The wind shifted direction. The air grew still. The birds fell silent, as if warned by something unseen. Every sensor froze for half a second, enough to trigger alarms, but too short to explain. And from the edge of the trees, a single figure stepped forward. He was human, unmistakably so tall, calm, and unarmed. He wore no armor, no helmet, just a simple coat that swayed gently in the wind. His face was weathered, not from age, but from experience. He moved without fear, as if nothing around him posed danger, not even the dozen guards pointing weapons in his direction. The Queen watched him closely. There was no signal, no teleportation, no stealth field. He had simply been there, waiting until he chose to be seen. His eyes met hers, steady and clear, and in that instant something changed. She had faced warlords, monsters, and machines built to destroy planets, but none had ever looked at her with such quiet confidence. He said nothing, but the weight of his presence was louder than any weapon. The Queen didn't order her men to fire. She didn't speak. She didn't move, because something deep within her, something primal and old, told her this was no ordinary encounter. This man, this human, was not a survivor of myths. He was the myth made real. And if even half the stories were true, then she was no longer the hunter. She was the guest. Queen Virelia was not the kind of ruler who tolerated silence. In her empire, when she spoke, systems listened. When she ordered, galaxies moved. But after the strange message on the ghost ship and the eerie silence from the Sol system, her patience wore thin. She believed what she had encountered was a trick and illusion meant to intimidate. She called it a cheap scare tactic, designed by some desperate remnant clinging to myths. And so, to prove that the Zorathi Empire feared no shadows, she assembled her grand fleet, a display of power so vast that its combined energy signature could be detected from halfway across the galaxy. Hundreds of warships, armored carriers, data cruisers, and stealth monitors formed a great circle around Sol. And at the center sat the Queen's personal flagship, black and gold, crowned with shimmering energy towers. As they entered the system, Virelia broadcast a message on every known frequency, in over 300 languages, demanding the presence of whatever still dared to claim the name of humanity. She made it clear this was not a request. It was a challenge. But the stars remained silent. No signal. No reply. No resistance. The system did not even bother to acknowledge her voice. That silence was louder than any weapon. Refusing to back down, Virelia sent a swarm of drones to Earth, expecting to uncover ruins or survivors hiding in the shadows. Instead, they found an untouched world-vast continents, undamaged cities, and oceans that still moved like living things. It was as if time had paused there while the rest of the galaxy changed. But something felt wrong. The skies were filled with satellites that rotated in perfect coordination, all quietly watching the orbiting fleet. The drones scanned for signals and found none. They searched for energy spikes and saw only balance. Then, one by one, without warning, they vanished, not destroyed, not jammed. They simply disappeared mid-scan, as if erased from existence. Virelia's technicians found no errors, no hacks, no natural cause, just missing data and broken connections. At first, the Queen frowned. Then she smiled not with joy, but with curiosity. Her instincts told her this was no trick. This was something older and deeper. Against all advice, she decided to go down herself. If the ghosts of Earth would not rise to greet her fleet, then she would go to their doorstep. She took her personal carrier, guarded by an elite team of soldiers trained to handle everything from planetary beasts to digital warfare, and descended into Earth's atmosphere. There was no resistance, no weapons fired. The carrier touched down in a wide green meadow, bordered by hills and the ruins of what had once been European cities. The silence there was unnatural. No engines, no machines, only soft wind and scattered birds that quickly flew away the moment her guard stepped out. The Queen exited last, dressed in her ceremonial armor, golden and sharp, glowing with command authority. Her guard spread out quickly, forming a defensive ring, scanning every direction for movement. The equipment picked up nothing. The atmosphere was clean. The soil was fertile. But the air carried something strange and ancient stillness, like the world itself, was holding its breath. For several minutes, nothing happened. The guards waited. The queen stood still, watching the tree line. Then the wind shifted. It was not sudden or violent, but it came with weight, as if the world itself had decided to pay attention. The birds stopped singing. A soft pressure touched their senses, not physical but present, as if something unseen had arrived. And from the edge of the forest, a figure stepped forward. He did not wear armor. He held no weapon. He walked slowly but with certainty, his coat fluttering in the wind, his eyes fixed on the queen. His presence was calm, but it carried power not loud, not flashy, but undeniable. The guards raised their weapons, scanning for hidden threats. But he made no move to attack. He simply walked until he stood at the edge of the perimeter. He was human. There was no doubt. And yet there was something more in the way he stood, the way he looked at her, not as a soldier facing an enemy, but as someone who had seen what others could not. His gaze was steady and without fear, like a man who had nothing to prove. Queen Virelia said nothing, and neither did he. But in that silent exchange, something deep inside her stirred. It was not fear, but recognition. A part of her that had always ruled through dominance now faced a presence that could not be measured by numbers or weapons. This man was not a survivor. He was a reminder that some legends were not just stories, and some warnings were not bluffs. And as the winds circled once again and the trees rustled softly, Queen Virelia realized the real challenge had only just begun. Queen Virelia had prepared herself for a fight, not words. She had expected this human, this legend come to life, to try and defend his world with defiance. Weapons, or perhaps the strange power that had erased her ships and drones. But instead, the man stood calmly and introduced himself as commander. Arlen, his voice smooth and clear, untouched by fear or tension. He spoke as if this meeting had been planned for a long time, as if her arrival had been expected. There was no anger in his tone, no urgency, only a deep, steady patience. He explained that humanity had not vanished in war, as the galaxy believed. Instead, they had stepped away, not because they were defeated, but because they had seen what the future held and chose to walk a different path. While empires like the Zorathi expanded through force, humanity had grown in silence, hidden in the spaces between stars, watching as civilizations rose and fell. Arlen told her that Earth had become a place of quiet learning, of deeper understanding, where technology was no longer a weapon, but a mirror of wisdom. He spoke not like a soldier, but like a historian sharing the truth not to threaten, but to remind. The queen listened, arms folded, face unreadable, but inside she felt something. Shift. Arlen's words were not meant to frighten, yet they unsettled her more than any fleet could. He spoke of wars long past, of alliances that broke and remade the galaxy, of powers far greater than hers that had once tried to control everything, only to be undone by their own pride. When she interrupted him with a sharp laugh and asked why, humans had not stopped her rise. If they were truly so advanced, he simply smiled, gently but without mockery, and said, "You were never a threat. You were a lesson." Those words hit harder than a weapon. The idea that all her conquests, all her victories, had been tolerated, not feared, rattled the edge of her pride. She stepped forward, voice colder now, and warned him not to speak down to her. She reminded him of her fleet above, her soldiers. Below, her power across systems. But before she could finish, something strange happened. Her soldiers tried to raise their weapons at Arlen, not on her order, but out of reflex, and their rifles locked in place, unmoving. Alarms triggered in their helmets. Their suits stiffened, frozen. In orbit, her flagship flickered as if caught. In a brief eclipse, reports came through half-formed, confused officers shouting about systems shutting down. controls failing, energy draining like water from a broken cup. Still, Arlen didn't move. He stood in the grass, hands by his side, eyes calm, no device, no visible action. And yet everything was changing around him. He looked at the Queen again and said, quietly, but with a weight that pressed on the wind, "This is not about fear. It's about balance. You are not ready to tip the scale." The meaning was clear. Even if unspoken, this wasn't about defeating her. It was about stopping her from breaking something larger than she understood. The Queen's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sheer mystery of it all. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her pride screamed that she must strike, that she could not be humiliated like this, that no one, not even a ghost from an ancient world, could speak to her with such quiet authority. And yet her instincts, deeper and older than her throne, told her this was a line she must not cross. There was power here, one that didn't shout or conquer, but waited like gravity, like time. She looked into Arlen's eyes and saw not anger, but knowledge, the kind that comes only after great loss and great understanding. Slowly, without a word, she lowered her hand, and the tension in the meadow eased like a storm passing overhead. Arlen simply nodded once, as if nothing more needed to be said. And in that moment, Aurelia understood that the greatest warning was not spoken with threats, but with calm, quiet certainty. She had met warriors, but Arlen was something else entirely. He was a reminder that true power does not announce itself. It simply waits until it's needed. That night, Queen Virelia sat alone in the quiet interior of her personal transport, the soft glow of data screens casting shadows across her face. Her guards were dismissed. Her advisors were silent. She had not spoken since returning from the meadow where she had met the human named Arlen. In the stillness, she accessed ancient archives records from the oldest corners of her empire, logs dismissed by scholars as myths or unexplained anomalies. She searched for every reference to humanity, every strange incident that had once been labeled as unknown activity or cosmic error. As the night wore on, patterns began to appear, quiet, hidden threads woven across centuries. There were mentions of artificial stars discovered where none had existed before, deep space wormholes that opened and closed without cause, systems thought to be lost that suddenly reappeared, changed and stabilized. In many of these records, there were subtle clues, energy signatures, encrypted symbols, faint digital traces that led nowhere, yet always hinted at a presence watching from behind the veil. Humanity hadn't vanished. They had simply stepped back and begun shaping the galaxy from behind its edges, touching events lightly, never claiming credit, never staying long enough to be seen. Every crisis that had nearly pushed the galactic order into chaos had mysteriously resolved just before tipping over. Every rising threat had been redirected, not with violence, but with influence. And slowly, Virelia realized that what she thought was her unchallenged rise through power had always been part of something larger. Her victories had been observed, perhaps even permitted, not because she was a threat, but because she played a role in the grand balance. That thought humbled her more than any defeat ever could. At dawn, she received a silent invitation. No signal, no voice, just a strange warmth in her thoughts guiding her outside. Arlen was waiting, standing beside a narrow trail that led through the forest and up toward the mountains that overlooked the forgotten cities. He spoke little as they walked. The Queen said nothing, her mind still filled with what she had discovered. When they reached the summit, the sun was rising, and the stars above still shimmered faintly in the fading night sky. Arlen pointed upward, not at any one constellation, but at the entire tapestry of lights stretching from horizon to horizon. "Do you see them?" he asked softly, each one flickering with life, order, and peace. "Not because we control them, but because we guide." Quietly, gently, without asking for credit. His voice carried no pride, only purpose. He turned to her and continued, "Galactic balance is not about winning. It's about harmony. Sometimes that means letting others rise. Sometimes it means stepping in. But always, it means understanding. When force is not the answer." Virelia looked at the stars, and for the first time in her reign, felt small, not in weakness, but in awe. She saw the galaxy as a vast, living system, not a prize to be taken, but a puzzle to be solved with care. She understood now that her wars, her victories, had been allowed to happen because they tested the galaxy's limits. She was never the true apex of power, only a part of a much deeper structure that humanity had quietly protected. Arlen said no more. He stood beside her for a long moment as the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the land. Then, without sound or sign, he was gone. No flash, no ship. Just an absence where he had stood, like a whisper fading on the wind. Virelia remained on the mountaintop long after, feeling the echo of his presence not in fear, but in understanding. There had been no battle, no exchange of weapons or fire, but she knew she had lost something and gained something greater. She had faced a warrior who needed no army, who had spoken not with commands, but with calm truths that could not be ignored. And as the wind carried the morning light through the trees, she realized the unspoken rule that had shaped everything. True warriors win before the fight begins, not through destruction, but through wisdom that bends even the strongest will without ever breaking it. When Queen Virelia returned to the heart of her empire, the stars seemed quieter than before. The grand halls of her capital station still echoed with the march of soldiers and the hum of diplomacy, but something in her gaze had changed. She did not carry the triumphant posture of a leader returning from conquest, nor did she speak of battles won or threats eliminated. Instead, she stepped into the command chambers and gave an order that shocked the High Council. All expansion was to stop immediately. Border territories were to be secured, not pushed. Colonies were to receive aid, not demands. And all broken treaties from decades past were to be reopened, studied, and repaired. Her advisors spoke in rushed, anxious tones. They feared rebellion, weakness, and loss of dominance. Some called her decision reckless. Others whispered of hidden enemies. But she offered no explanation. She simply said, "The galaxy belongs to more than empires." Her voice was calm but final, and none dared challenge it directly. Rumors spread quickly, as they always do when silence holds more weight than speeches. Whispers drifted across spaceports and trade routes of the Queen's journey to the Soul system, of the vanished fleet that never returned, of a single human seen walking out of a forest with no weapons and no fear. Tales emerged in fragmented retellings, each one a little different, but always centered on a figure known only as Commander Arlen. They said he stood before the Queen without raising his voice, and yet the Zorathi war machines had frozen. They said he spoke of peace, not as a dreamer, but as someone who understood war too well to trust it. In the far colonies, children began to play as Arlen, pretending to stop fights with nothing but words. Some called him the Peacebringer. Others called him the last human. And though few believed he truly existed, the stories grew stronger with each retelling. Even among Zorathi warriors, hardened by years of training, the legend took root. They repeated it in quiet mess, halls and training camps, that the strongest warrior they had ever known had no army, no ship, and no need to fight. The myth of humanity, once considered extinct, was reborn not in violence, but in memory and meaning. Yet through it all, Earth remained silent. No ships came from Sol, no messages were sent, no demands were made. And still, something unseen shifted across the galaxy. Conflicts that once seemed inevitable paused. Alliances long broken began to mend, and old enemies found new reasons to talk. It was as if the very presence of the legend was enough to change the current of events. Varelia kept no record of her conversation with Arlen. She never spoke of the mountain, or the vanished drones, or the silence that followed him like a shadow. But sometimes, late at night, she stood at the edge of her observatory, staring at the distant point of light that marked Saul's position. And in that moment, she no longer saw a battlefield or a mystery. She saw a mirror, a reflection of what her empire could be if guided by wisdom instead of hunger. She had once ruled through dominance, believing power meant control. But now she understood the truth Arlen had shown her. Real strength was the ability not to use it. It was the courage to step back, to listen, and to protect even those who did not ask for protection. The galaxy no longer needed more rulers. It needed guardians. And though the stars would always carry the marks of war, they now also held the quiet echo of a meeting in a meadow where one queen stood before one man, and left not with victory, but with vision. And that, more than anything, made her story one worth remembering.